So imagine just a single, like, incredibly heavy drop of rain. Um, Most of us would probably think that a sudden downpour is exactly what a, parched, drought-stricken farm needs, right?
Right. I mean, that's the logical assumption.
Yeah, exactly. But today, we're actually going to unpack the counterintuitive physics of why that specific violent drop of rain is actually destroying India's soil from the inside out.
It's fascinating and terrifying, honestly.
Totally. And like at the exact same time, we're going to look at how a blocked shipping lane thousands of miles away in the Middle East is fundamentally rewriting how you pay for the fuel in your car.
Yeah, it really is the ultimate demonstration of how fragile and interconnected our global systems have become. I mean, you really can't isolate geology from geopolitics anymore.
No, you really can't. And that is exactly what we are mastering today. So welcome to this session, the Daily Deep Dive, or 3D initiative of UPSC with Saurabh Kaushik. If you are joining us to build your analytical edge, you are in the right place. We have a massive stack of source material today from the June 7th and 8th, 2026 current affairs landscape.
A seriously massive stack.
Yeah, it's a lot. And our mission isn't just to, read you the headlines. We're going to systematically unpack 16 distinct, highly complex events.
Right.
We'll break down the mechanics of what actually happened, define the crucial key terms you need to know, and most importantly, analyze exactly why this matters for the IAS framework.
And I am genuinely excited to act as your analytical guide through all this material today because when you first look at this stack of updates, it seems like a chaotic mix.
Oh, completely.
We're jumping from like macroeconomics and international shipping insurance to microscopic bacteria living in agricultural soil and then straight into the constitutional rights of a child in a courtroom.
It sounds totally random, but the deeper we go, the more you, the listener, will see the through line here.
Exactly.
You're going to see how deeply every single one of these events ripples into the next. So let's just dive right into the deep end with the global energy market. Topic 1.
Let's do it.
So in May 2026, we saw a massive, unexpected surge in India's crude oil imports from Russia. But what makes this fascinating is the immediate contrast, right?
Right, because at the exact same moment Russian imports spiked, our imports from the traditional U.S.-linked Gulf sources just plummeted.
Yeah. And the catalyst for this entire shift is a geographic bottleneck. We're talking about the ongoing disruption in the Strait of Hormuz.
Yeah. And to truly grasp the IAS relevance here, you have to contextualize the sheer scale of India's energy appetite. I mean, historically, India imports roughly 90% of its crude oil requirements.
90%, that's huge.
It is the absolute lifeblood of the economy. Traditionally, the Gulf region, so we're talking about Saudi Arabia, the UAE, Iraq, Kuwait, they supplied about 60% of that baseload.
Right, because it was a reliable, geographically close pipeline?
Exactly. But the geopolitical instability surrounding the Strait of Hormuz has essentially just thrown a massive wrench into that entire supply chain.
I was actually looking at the maritime maps for this,
Yeah.
and the logistics are just mind-blowing. It's essentially like finding out the main highway toll booth to your city has been barricaded.
That's a great way to put it.
You still need the goods,
Yeah.
right? So you're forced to take this massive 20-day scenic detour. Because Hormuz is compromised, ships carrying Russian crude are now completely bypassing the Middle East.
Yeah, they're taking the long way around.
They're navigating the treacherous Arctic route, or they're going all the way down and around the Cape of Good Hope at the southern tip of Africa just to reach Indian ports.
Which is a brilliant, albeit desperate, logistical pivot. But the underlying mechanics of global shipping dictate that distance equals money.
Right.
Rerouting a massive oil tanker around the Cape of Good Hope adds anywhere from 15 to 20 days to a single voyage. And when you add that time, the freight costs just skyrocket.
Just on fuel alone, right?
Fuel? Yes. But it's not just the fuel for the ships. It is the maritime insurance premiums.
Oh, wow. I didn't even think about the insurance.
Oh, yeah. Navigating longer, potentially more hazardous routes requires astronomical insurance coverage. And those compounded shipping and insurance costs are now severely eating into the discounted per barrel price that Russia originally offered to secure India's business.
Okay, I want to push on that financial aspect because there's a massive geopolitical chess game happening beneath the surface of these shipments. We have to talk about the G7 oil price cap.
Right, it's the $60 cap.
Yeah. How does a price cap actually function when sovereign nations are the ones doing the buying? Like, who enforces that?
So this is a critical mechanism to understand. The G7 nations, along with the EU and Australia, imposed a strict $60 per barrel price cap on Russian seaborne crude.
Okay.
The strategic intent was pretty straightforward: allow Russian oil to keep flowing to prevent a global supply shock and massive inflation, but severely limit the profit margin Russia can generate to, fund its war efforts.
Makes sense in theory, but how do they enforce it?
Well, the enforcement mechanism is entirely built on Western financial dominance. If a buyer anywhere in the world agrees to pay more than $60 for a barrel of Russian oil, Western maritime companies are legally forbidden from providing the shipping vessels.
Wow.
Or, more importantly, the crucial indemnity insurance for that specific cargo.
But the data clearly shows India is still buying massive quantities, often way above that cap. So how exactly are we legally navigating around this Western financial blockade?
Through the rapid acceleration of what the industry calls the shadow fleet.
The shadow fleet. Sounds like a movie.
It kind of is. Because India and China are not bound by the G7 cap, they have circumvented the Western insurance monopoly by utilizing aging tankers that operate entirely outside of Western financial jurisdictions.
Oh, I see.
They're securing insurance from non-Western entities, often backed by sovereign guarantees. It is a parallel maritime economy that has emerged almost overnight to keep this oil moving, much to the frustration of policymakers in Washington, obviously.
Yeah, I bet. And it isn't just the shipping insurance that's operating in a parallel economy. It's the actual currency changing hands. We are seeing a massive structural shift away from the U.S. dollar, which brings up the rupee-ruble trade mechanism.
Right, the de-dollarization push.
Right. On paper, paying for oil in our own currency sounds like a massive win for India's energy security, doesn't it?
On paper, yes, absolutely. The de-dollarization narrative is very appealing. The rupee-ruble mechanism was designed so that Indian refiners could pay for this massive influx of Russian crude by depositing Indian rupees into special Vostro accounts.
And these are held by Russian banks in India, right?
Exactly. It theoretically reduces our dependence on dollar reserves and protects us from U.S. interest rate fluctuations. But if you look at the macroeconomic reality, the mechanism has actually created a severe structural headache for the RBI.
Because it's a completely lopsided relationship. I mean, we're buying billions of dollars worth of oil from Russia, but what exactly is Russia buying from India?
Very little in comparison. And that is the crux of the problem right there. This trade imbalance has resulted in a mountain of Indian rupees essentially just trapped in these Russian Vostro accounts.
Because they can't spend them.
Exactly. The rupee is not a fully convertible global currency like the dollar or the euro. Russia cannot easily take those billions of rupees and spend them in China or Europe or Africa.
Right.
So you have Moscow sitting on a surplus of Indian currency with very few avenues to deploy it. And this poses a significant intellectual and practical challenge for the RBI's broader long-term ambition of internationalizing the rupee.
Yeah, because if your most critical energy partner finds your currency difficult to utilize globally, it really undermines the argument for the rupee as a viable international reserve currency.
Precisely.
It's a stark realization that energy security is not just about physically extracting oil from the ground. It is about navigating this massive labyrinth of international sanctions, shadow banking systems, and maritime choke points just to get that resource to a refinery.
Exactly. The physical extraction of the resource is only step one.
Right. But if we were talking about the sheer physical footprint of extracting resources, we kind of have to look at how we measure the health of the ecosystems that sit right on top of those resources.
That's a great point.
Which is a perfect lens to look at topic 2, the recent environmental developments in Assam. The results from the summer 2026 Rapid Bird Survey at the Kaziranga National Park and Tiger Reserve just came out, and the biological data is phenomenal.
It truly is. For anyone tracking environmental governance for the IAS, Kaziranga is usually viewed purely through the lens of megafauna, right?
Yeah, rhinos and tigers.
Right. It was designated a UNESCO World Heritage Site in 1985. It spans over 1,000 square kilometers across the highly dynamic Brahmaputra River floodplain. It's globally famous for hosting roughly 2/3 of the world's remaining one-horned rhinoceros population, alongside the highest density of Bengal tigers.
But this
Rapid Bird Survey forces us to completely reevaluate the park's immense value to global avian biodiversity.
Because the numbers from the survey are staggering. They formally recorded 30 distinct species of raptors and 6 species of storks.
Incredible numbers.
But to understand why these specific birds are in Assam, we have to zoom way out and look at the invisible highways in the sky. Let's break down the concept of the Central Asian flyway.
Yeah, so if you are visualizing global ecology, you really cannot think in terms of human borders. The Central Asian Flyway is one of the world's major migratory corridors.
Right.
It is a massive geographic funnel that stretches from the vast breeding grounds up in the Arctic Ocean, Siberia, and Central Asia, all the way down to the wintering grounds across South and Southeast Asia, even reaching the Maldives.
Wow.
And Kaziranga sits squarely in the bottleneck of this immense flyway. It acts as a critical, nutrient-rich pit stop and wintering ground for millions of birds escaping the northern freeze.
And one of the most critical permanent residents they documented is the greater adjutant stork. Why is this specific bird such a focal point for conservationists?
So, the greater adjutant stork, scientifically known as Leptoptilus dubius, is an incredibly vulnerable species. It's currently listed as endangered on the IUCN Red List.
Okay.
Historically, its range was massive, covering much of South and Southeast Asia. Today, due to severe habitat loss and the draining of wetlands, its global population has completely collapsed.
That's tragic.
It really is. It now essentially only breeds in 2 isolated pockets on Earth. One in Cambodia, and the other right here in the Brahmaputra Valley of Assam.
Wow, just 2 places.
Yeah. Kaziranga holds one of the very last globally significant, highly protected breeding colonies for this bird. Its survival is inextricably linked to the health of those specific wetlands.
But let me ask you about the raptors. I mean, finding 30 different species of eagles, hawks, and falcons sounds impressive on a brochure. But ecologically, why does a high concentration of birds of prey matter so much for the park's overall biological report card?
It all comes down to the concept of trophic levels and keystone predators.
Okay, unpack that for me.
Sure. Raptors are apex predators. They sit at the absolute top of the avian food web. They require a massive amount of caloric energy to survive. Therefore, if you have 30 different species of apex predators not just surviving, but thriving and coexisting in one geographic area.
It means there's a lot of food.
Exactly. It is the ultimate empirical indicator that the biological foundation below them is incredibly dense and healthy. It means the population of rodents, amphibians, fish, smaller birds, and massive insect swarms are flourishing.
Right, you can't fake a healthy predator population.
You really can't. It is the ultimate proof of a highly functioning wetland ecology.
Now, I have to challenge the conventional narrative here because every single monsoon season, we see the exact same tragic footage on the news. The Brahmaputra River breaches its banks, Kaziranga floods entirely, rhinos are shown desperately swimming toward higher ground on the highway, and it is universally framed as an environmental disaster.
Yes, the optics are terrible.
Right. So is this flooding purely a negative event for the park's ecosystem?
That is a brilliant question, and it addresses a very common, very human misconception about dynamic ecosystems.
Okay.
From the perspective of an individual animal that is displaced, injured, or drowns, the flood is absolutely a tragedy. But from a macroecological perspective, those violent periodic floods from the Brahmaputra are the absolute lifeblood of Kaziranga.
Wait, how so? It literally looks like sheer destruction.
Because the destruction is necessary for renewal. The floodwaters bring millions of tons of nutrient-rich alluvial silt down from the Himalayas and deposit it across the floodplain.
Oh, so it acts like a natural fertilizer.
A massive natural fertilizer. Furthermore, the sheer force of the water washes away the older, coarser, woody grasses that the herbivores can't eat anymore.
I see.
When the water recedes, that hyper-fertile soil immediately sprouts fresh, highly nutritious grass shoots. If you engineered a dam and permanently stopped the Brahmaputra from flooding Kaziranga, the entire ecosystem would eventually collapse.
Really, just from stopping the floods.
Absolutely. Without the water clearing the landscape, the grassland would quickly undergo ecological succession and turn into a dense, dry woodland. The rhinos would starve, the tigers would lose their hunting grounds, and the wetlands supporting those 30 species of raptors would just vanish.
It's a profound paradox. The very mechanism that brings death and destruction is the exact same mechanism that guarantees the biological lineage of the entire ecosystem.
It's nature's reset button.
And, in Kaziranga, we rely on observing that biological lineage to understand the truth of the environment. But when we transition into the human legal system, that pursuit of biological lineage is currently sparking a massive constitutional crisis.
Yes, moving on to topic 3.
Exactly. This brings us to a deeply complex intersection of law and human rights. The Supreme Court's current battle balancing paternity against privacy.
This is arguably one of the most delicate legal tightropes the judiciary is walking right now. It forces a direct confrontation between deeply personal fundamental rights and the welfare of a child.
Let's lay out this scenario for you listening. The Supreme Court is increasingly dealing with highly contentious matrimonial disputes. We're talking divorces, custody battles, maintenance claims, where one party demands a scientific DNA test to definitively establish the biological parentage of a child.
Right.
The fundamental clash here is a father asserting his right to privacy under Article 21, basically refusing to submit biological material, while the opposing side argues for a child's absolute right to know their true identity.
And to understand the weight of the privacy argument, you really have to look at the landmark 2017 Puttaswamy judgment.
Oh, that was a huge one.
Massive. In that ruling, a 9-judge bench of the Supreme Court unequivocally enshrined the right to privacy as an intrinsic part of the right to life and personal liberty under Article 21 of the Constitution.
Right, privacy is fundamental.
Exactly. And the court explicitly stated that privacy encompasses bodily autonomy and informational privacy. Therefore, legally speaking, compelling a man to provide a blood or saliva sample for a DNA test is a direct physical infringement on his fundamental right to bodily integrity.
It's essentially like someone demanding the master encryption key to your most private digital server. You can't just hand over a court order, forcing someone to unlock their biological data without proving that there is something of absolute critical societal importance locked behind that door, right?
Exactly.
A mere suspicion shouldn't be enough to breach Article 21.
That is precisely the legal logic the Supreme Court is applying here. They have ruled that while the right to privacy is fundamental, it is not absolute. But neither is the right to a DNA test.
So how do they decide?
To resolve this, the court utilizes the doctrine of proportionality. The bench has explicitly warned lower courts that they cannot order DNA tests simply to satisfy the, quote, roving inquiries of a suspicious spouse.
Ah, so no fishing expeditions.
Exactly. A DNA test cannot be used as a fishing expedition to prove infidelity.
So what actually triggers the test then? What passes that proportionality threshold?
The court mandates that the disclosure of biological parentage must be eminently necessary, proportionate to the infringement of privacy, and inextricably linked to a substantive legal claim.
Can you give an example?
Sure. So, for example, if a child is facing destitution and requires a DNA test to legally force a biological father to pay maintenance, or if there is a deeply contested inheritance issue where biological lineage is the sole determining factor.
Got it.
In those specific cases, the child's fundamental right to survival and justice outweighs the father's right to keep his DNA private.
And the state has a very specific, almost parental obligation in these cases, right? Which introduces the legal doctrine of parens patriae.
Yes. Parens patriae is a Latin term meaning parent of the nation. It's a deeply rooted legal doctrine that grants the state, and by extension the judiciary, the inherent power and profound duty to act as the ultimate guardian for those who are vulnerable and incapable of protecting themselves.
And kids obviously fall into that category.
Exactly. In family law, minors are the ultimate vulnerable party. So when a judge is weighing Article 21 privacy against a DNA test, the parens patriae doctrine dictates that the best interest and welfare of the child must be the paramount consideration. It supersedes the egos or privacy concerns of the warring adults.
Wow. There's also a very interesting evidentiary hurdle mentioned in the source material regarding Section 112 of the Indian Evidence Act. How does an old evidence law complicate modern DNA testing?
Section 112 of the Indian Evidence Act is a fascinating piece of legal history that actually still holds massive weight today. It establishes a presumption of legitimacy.
Meaning?
The law states that if a child is born during the continuance of a valid marriage, the law automatically and robustly presumes that the husband is the legitimate father.
Oh, we see.
This law was originally designed to protect children from the extreme social stigma of being labeled illegitimate in open court back in the day. It is a rebuttable presumption, meaning you can fight it, but the legal threshold to disprove it is intentionally set incredibly high.
So they don't want to just casually overturn that.
No, the court is highly reluctant to order a DNA test that might legally bastardize a child who is currently protected by the presumption of Section 112, unless it's absolutely unavoidable.
And this isn't just a domestic legal vacuum either. The courts are also looking at international frameworks like the UNCRC, right?
Absolutely. India is a signatory to the United Nations Convention on the Rights of the Child. Article 7 of the UNCRC explicitly recognizes that a child has, as far as possible, the right to know and be cared for by his or her parents.
Right.
So the Indian Supreme Court is caught in this massive intersection trying to harmonize domestic evidence laws from the 1800s, cutting-edge modern constitutional privacy rights, and international human rights obligations, all resting on a single swab of DNA.
It is breathtaking how much constitutional and moral weight is carried in a microscopic drop of biological material.
It really is.
But, if we are looking at how microscopic elements dictate massive outcomes, we need to pivot from the delicate balance in our courtrooms to the increasingly volatile balance in our atmosphere and our soil. Let's move to topic 4.
Yes, the climate and soil moisture data.
Let's examine this deeply concerning environmental analysis regarding the climate's direct impact on soil moisture and nitrogen.
If you are analyzing agricultural economics for the IAS, this is perhaps one of the most terrifying, counterintuitive scientific feedback loops currently operating in India.
Yeah, let's break down the core finding because at first glance, it completely defies basic logic. The data shows that climate change is driving a significant increase in the frequency of intense, violent bursts of rain.
Right.
But simultaneously, scientists are finding that these massive influxes of water are leaving the agricultural soils dramatically drier while actively stripping the soil of its vital nitrogen content.
Yes.
Stop and explain this to me. How can an increase in the volume of rain falling from the sky leave the ground below it fundamentally dehydrated? Doesn't make sense.
To understand the paradox, you really have to look at the fluid dynamics of how water interacts with Earth. It is entirely about the critical ratio of infiltration versus runoff.
Okay.
So imagine a gentle, steady drizzle lasting for 3 days. The water hits the surface slowly, giving the microscopic pores and root channels in the soil ample time to act like a sponge, drawing the moisture deep into the subterranean soil profile. That is healthy infiltration.
But climate change is altering the delivery system.
Precisely. We are seeing a shift away from steady monsoons toward brief, highly concentrated microbursts of extreme rainfall.
Just massive dumps of water.
Right. When a massive volume of water violently hits the earth in a span of, say, 30 minutes, the absolute top millimeter of the soil instantly saturates, swells, and physically seals itself off. The soil loses its porosity.
Oh, wow. So it just acts like concrete.
Basically, yeah. Because the water can no longer infiltrate downward, the vast majority of that rainfall simply flows horizontally across the surface as runoff. It strips the topsoil and washes straight into drainage canals and rivers. The deeper root zones of the crops remain completely bone dry, despite a torrential downpour happening right above them.
So if you look at an annual rain gauge, a specific district might technically record a normal total volume of rainfall for the year. But because of how aggressively it was delivered, the agricultural soil effectively experienced a severe drought.
Exactly. The total volume is totally deceptive. The velocity of delivery is what destroys the agricultural utility of the water. And that physical dehydration is only the first half of the crisis.
There's more.
Oh yeah, the second half is a biochemical disaster known as denitrification.
Right, the loss of nitrogen. Nitrogen is the fundamental building block for plant growth. It's the core of most fertilizers. How does rain physically steal nitrogen?
It's not the rain stealing it, it's a bacterial heist triggered by the rain.
A bacterial heist. Okay, tell me more.
When that intense burst of water hits and temporarily waterlogs that top layer of soil, it displaces all the oxygen trapped in the soil pores. It creates a sudden, localized anaerobic environment.
Meaning an environment completely devoid of free oxygen.
Exactly. And nature abhors a vacuum.
So what happens when the oxygen vanishes?
Well, there are massive colonies of specific denitrifying bacteria living in the soil. Normally, they breathe free oxygen just like we do, but when the soil floods and goes anaerobic, these bacteria start suffocating.
Okay.
To survive, they execute a biochemical pivot. They look for oxygen molecules bound up in other compounds. They target the valuable soil nitrates, the exact NO3 molecules that farmers desperately need their crops to absorb for growth.
Oh, no.
The bacteria literally rip the oxygen atoms off the nitrate molecules to breathe, and in doing so, they chemically dismantle the fertilizer.
So the bacteria survive the flood, but what happens to the remaining nitrogen once the oxygen is stripped away?
It converts from a solid bioavailable nutrient into a gas, and it simply volatilizes. It floats out of the soil and into the atmosphere. But the tragedy is that the bacteria don't just produce harmless nitrogen gas. Under these stress conditions, they frequently produce nitrous oxide, or N2O.
I noticed the source material places a massive emphasis on N2O. Why is this specific gas so critical?
Because nitrous oxide is an absolute climate nightmare. As a greenhouse gas, A2O is approximately 273 times more potent at trapping heat in the Earth's atmosphere than carbon dioxide over a century-long timescale.
273 times.
Yeah. And currently, global agriculture is the dominant source of N2O emissions, accounting for roughly 60% of the total.
Let me just synthesize this because the feedback loop here is honestly apocalyptic. Climate change warms the atmosphere, which holds more moisture, causing these violent bursts of rain.
Right.
The violent rain hits the farm, sealing the soil and causing runoff, which dehydrates the crops. Simultaneously, the temporary surface flooding triggers bacteria to eat the fertilizer, starving the crops of nutrients. And then the byproduct of that bacterial feast is nitrous oxide, a supercharged greenhouse gas that floats into the atmosphere, causing more warming, which guarantees even more violent bursts of rain next season.
That is the exact mechanism. You have perfectly described the death spiral of rain-fed agriculture under climate stress.
Oh, it's terrifying.
And to ground this in immediate IAS relevance, consider the scale. Roughly 55% of India's total net sown area is purely rain-fed.
Over half.
Over half of our agricultural backbone has no canal or groundwater irrigation safety net. They rely entirely on the sky delivering water at the correct velocity. If this infiltration to runoff ratio continues to skew, crop yields across the subcontinent will inevitably crash.
Which highlights exactly why government frameworks like the National Mission for Sustainable Agriculture, or NMSA, are critical. Concepts like carbon farming or aggressively enhancing soil organic carbon so the earth acts like a better sponge, they aren't just optional feel-good environmental initiatives anymore. They are urgent, baseline economic defense strategies.
Without a doubt, if you lose the soil architecture, you lose the economy.
Wow. So we've just seen how natural, climate-driven water runoff can systematically devastate soil ecology. But what happens when the water diversion isn't driven by atmospheric physics, but by intentional industrial human extraction?
Topic 5.
Right, topic 5. This brings us to a macroscopic crisis playing out in Rajasthan right now. Let's look at the existential threat facing Sambar Lake.
This is a classic case study in the tragedy of the commons, where unregulated industrial extraction pushes a fragile ecosystem past its tipping point.
For those who haven't studied the geography, Sambar Salt Lake is India's largest inland saltwater lake. It is a massive elliptical depression in the Aravalli Range. During a strong monsoon, it can expand to cover 350 square kilometers.
It's huge.
Yeah, and it has a profound historical and economic legacy, having been a primary source of salt production since the era of the Chand dynasty centuries ago. But the current crisis isn't about traditional extraction, is it?
No, it's about a fundamental disruption of the hydrology. Illegal private industrial salt pan operators are actively damming and diverting the vital freshwater rivers, specifically the Menda and Rupangar rivers that are supposed to flow into the lake.
And if you understand basic hydrology, cutting off the freshwater supply to an already saline lake triggers an immediate devastating ecological cascade.
Absolutely.
You have the intense Rajasthan sun constantly evaporating water out of the lake, but the natural dilution from the incoming rivers has been artificially stopped. As the water volume plummets, the concentration of the remaining salt spikes exponentially. The lake moves from being naturally saline to toxically hypersaline.
It is essentially like a rogue corporation secretly tapping into a major metropolitan water reservoir to run a private cooling plant. But the victim here isn't a human neighborhood. It is an intricate, highly specialized biological food web.
That analogy is highly accurate in terms of the resource theft.
Yeah.
And the very first casualties of this hypersalinity are the halophytes. I was reading about these halophytes. It is incredible that a biological organism can actually thrive in a salt lake.
But even they have a breaking point, right?
Exactly. Halophytes are highly specialized, salt-tolerant vegetation. They have evolved incredible cellular mechanisms to excrete or isolate salt, allowing them to grow where other plants would instantly wither.
They're tough.
They are, and they form the absolute foundational base of the biological food web in these saline wetlands. But they are evolved for a specific range of salinity. When the illegal salt pans choke off the fresh water and the lake becomes hypersaline, it crosses their biological threshold.
So they die.
The halophytes suffer osmotic shock and die off en masse. And in ecology, when you destroy the base of the food web, everything above it immediately starves.
And at Sambar Lake, the most visible, heartbreaking consequence of everything above it starving involves tens of thousands of migratory birds, specifically the greater flamingos.
This is why the issue has international legal ramifications. Sambar Lake was officially designated as a Ramsar Convention wetland of international importance back in 1990. Okay, so it's globally protected.
In theory, yes. The primary reason for that global designation is its role as a critical wintering and non-breeding habitat for massive flocks of flamingos arriving from northern Asia. These birds rely entirely on the specific ecology of the shallow, moderately saline water to feed on specialized algae and brine shrimp.
But now that's all ruined.
Right. The industrial water diversion has effectively turned their ancient sanctuary into an ecological death trap.
The source material explicitly references a horrifying mass mortality event in 2019. Over 18,000 birds literally dropped dead in and around the lake.
Yes, and the pathology of that event is directly linked to the disrupted hydrology. The mass death was caused by an outbreak of avian botulism.
Botulism, like food poisoning.
Kind of. The bacteria that produce the lethal botulinum toxin do not thrive in healthy, flowing water. They require stagnant, hypersaline, warm, oxygen-depleted conditions, which is the exact artificial environment created when the illegal salt pans choked off the rivers.
Oh, that makes sense.
The birds ingested the toxin, suffered rapid muscular paralysis, and drowned or starved. Currently, the National Green Tribunal, the NGT, which is the specialized statutory body for handling complex environmental disputes in India, is actively monitoring the situation alongside the High Court.
Have they done anything?
They have ordered the dismantling of these illegal structures, but the reports indicate that enforcement on the ground remains a massive, ongoing challenge.
It's a stark, very real reminder of how fragile international environmental governance frameworks like the Ramsar Convention can be when they collide with localized, unregulated industrial greed.
The laws on the books are only as strong as the enforcement on the ground.
Exactly. Speaking of enforcement and the struggle to regulate industries that seem to operate just outside the traditional boundaries of the law, let's execute a massive pivot from physical extraction to digital extraction. Topic 6.
Let's do it.
Let's look at the Supreme Court's ongoing struggle to regulate the digital Wild West of India's economy. This is the constitutional battle over online gaming curbs.
If you want to understand the intersection of constitutional law, behavioral psychology, and the modern digital economy, this is the definitive case study.
Here is the landscape. Over the past few years, several state governments, most notably Tamil Nadu, Andhra Pradesh, Karnataka, and Telangana, have attempted to pass stringent laws essentially banning or heavily restricting online games that involve real money betting.
Right.
We are talking about online rummy, online poker, and various massive daily fantasy sports platforms. The multi-billion-dollar gaming industry immediately sued, claiming these bans are unconstitutional. Now, the Supreme Court has weighed in, effectively backing the state's legislative competence to regulate these platforms to protect their citizens from severe gambling addiction and financial ruin.
To understand how the Supreme Court arrived at this, you really have to map out the constitutional battlefield. It is essentially a war between two specific entries in the Constitution.
Break it down for us.
The gaming corporations are building their entire legal defense around Article 19(1)G, which guarantees every citizen the fundamental right to practice any profession or to carry on any occupation, trade, or business.
Okay, freedom of business.
Exactly. They argue they are legitimate, highly taxed technology companies operating under Entry 26 of the state list, which governs trade and commerce, or falling under the union list's residuary powers regarding internet platforms.
But the state governments are looking at the exact same platforms and seeing a completely different reality.
Totally. The states are leaning entirely on Entry 34 of the state list. This specific entry grants state legislatures exclusive sovereign power to make laws regarding betting and gambling.
So there's the conflict.
The states are arguing to the Supreme Court that despite the slick user interfaces and the whole tech startup branding, these online platforms are functionally operating as massive, unregulated digital casinos, operating directly inside the smartphones of millions of vulnerable citizens.
But wait, didn't the Supreme Court already settle the core of this debate decades ago? Anyone who follows Indian law knows about the famous Rummy precedent.
You are referring to the 1996 K.R. Lakshmanan case, which is the bedrock of gambling jurisprudence in India.
Yes, that one.
In that landmark judgment, the Supreme Court established the legal distinction between games of chance and games of skill. The court famously held that games like rummy or betting on horse racing are predominantly games of skill.
Right.
A player uses memory, strategy, and observation to win. Therefore, because skill dominates, the court ruled they do not constitute gambling in the traditional legally prohibited sense.
So if the Supreme Court ruled in 1996 that rummy is a game of skill and therefore legal, how can a state government in 2026 successfully argue to ban an app that literally just lets you play rummy online?
That is the multi-billion-dollar question.
Seriously.
The states are successfully arguing a very sophisticated psychological and technological point. They argue that the medium has fundamentally altered the nature of the game. They're telling the Supreme Court that a physical game of rummy played with friends over a few hours is entirely different from an online platform. The online apps utilize opaque, random number generators, algorithmic matchmaking, high-speed microtransactions, push notifications, and 247 accessibility.
It's gamified.
Highly gamified. The states argue that this digital architecture artificially accelerates the pace of play to such an extreme degree that it neutralizes human skill. It transforms a strategic parlor game into a highly addictive, chance-based slot machine designed purely for rapid financial extraction.
So the Supreme Court is looking at this and saying, yes, the state has the power to regulate this digital extraction under Entry 34, but they can't just drop a blind blanket ban on the entire internet.
That is the nuanced, highly complex stance the Supreme Court has taken. They upheld the state's legislative competence, recognizing their right to impose reasonable restrictions in the interest of the general public under Article 19.6, specifically addressing the undeniable surge in gambling-related suicides and financial distress.
But there's a catch.
However, the court also threw a lifeline to the industry, clarifying that states cannot simply ban everything unconditionally. A state government still bears the legal burden of distinguishing between games of pure chance and games where skill remains the dominant factor. They have to analyze the mechanics of each digital platform individually, which is a massive regulatory headache.
And it isn't just a state versus industry fight. There is massive friction with the central government as well, right? How do the new IT rules fit into this mess?
It creates a severe jurisdictional overlap. The central government's Ministry of Electronics and Information Technology, or MeitY, recently notified the online gaming rules under the IT Act of 2023.
Yep.
The center's approach was to create a framework for self-regulatory bodies, or SRBs. These SRBs were supposed to analyze algorithms and verify if a platform qualifies as a permissible online real money game.
So the industry regulates itself.
Partly, yes, but here is the constitutional catch. Central IT rules governing internet intermediaries do not magically override a state government's sovereign constitutional power to ban gambling under Entry 34.
So a tech company could get a stamp of approval from the central government in Delhi, but the moment their app is opened by a user in Chennai, the CEO could technically be violating a state criminal ban.
Exactly. You have a massive industry caught in the crossfire between a central self-regulatory framework and strict, localized state prohibitions. And when you factor in the massive economic blow from the GST Council's recent decision to levy a flat 28% tax on the full face value of all bets placed,
Ouch.
yeah, you are looking at an industry that is simultaneously fighting for its legal existence and its financial viability.
It is a fascinating look at how sluggish legal frameworks struggle to contain the speed of algorithmic innovation. Now, we've spent a lot of time analyzing the digital fuel, the data, and addictive algorithms driving the modern tech economy. Let's make a hard pivot to topic 7.
The E85 fuel launch.
Right. Let's look at an actual physical fuel revolution that is currently rewriting the thermodynamics of India's transportation sector.
If you are tracking India's roadmap toward decarbonization and energy independence, the launch of E85 is a massive structural milestone.
Set the scene for us. On June 5, 2026, perfectly timed for World Environment Day, the Union Minister for Petroleum and Natural Gas, Hardeep Singh Puri, officially launched E85 fuel at a major summit.
Right.
For the listener who just pulls up to the petrol pump and grabs the standard nozzle, what exactly is the chemistry of E85?
E85 is a highly concentrated biofuel blend. The E stands for ethanol, which is a renewable plant-based alcohol derived primarily from agricultural feedstocks, in India's case, heavily relying on sugarcane molasses and broken rice.
Okay, so it's organic.
Mostly, yes. The 85 means that this specific fuel is a blend containing anywhere from 80% to 85% pure ethanol, mixed with only 14% to 19% traditional fossil-derived petrol to aid in cold engines starting.
That's a huge ratio.
It's a radical departure from the standard E10 or E20 blends currently in use. Importantly, E85 cannot be put into a standard car engine. It is specifically engineered for flex fuel vehicles, or FFVs.
I was trying to visualize the engineering behind an FFV. It's essentially like having a highly adaptable multi-tool engine. You could pull up to a rural pump that only has an E20 blend,
Yeah.
fill half your tank. Then you drive to a city, pull up to an advanced E85 pump, and top off the rest of the tank.
Exactly.
So you have this chaotic chemical cocktail sloshing around, but the car's brain just instantly analyzes it and figures out the perfect recipe to burn it efficiently.
Yeah.
How does it actually do that without destroying the engine block?
The magic of a flex fuel vehicle lies entirely in the Advanced Engine Control Unit, the ECU, combined with highly sensitive oxygen sensors in my exhaust system.
Okay.
In a traditional car, the ECU expects a very specific static air-to-fuel ratio designed for pure petrol. But in a true FFV, the ECU is continuously analyzing the exhaust gases in real time. It can instantly detect the exact proportion of ethanol currently flowing from the tank.
So it's constantly adjusting.
Instantly. Because ethanol contains less energy per volume than petrol, but carries its own oxygen molecules, the ECU instantaneously recalculates and adjusts the fuel injector pulse width and the spark ignition timing to ensure the engine operates perfectly, whether it's burning 20% ethanol or 85% ethanol.
Okay, that is brilliant engineering. But let's look at the economics, because a consumer doesn't buy fuel just to appreciate the ECU algorithms. Why would a middle-class driver choose to invest in an FFV and specifically hunt down an E85 pump?
It comes down to two major incentives: immediate cost savings and enhanced engine performance.
Let's start with cost.
Economically, because ethanol is domestically produced from agriculture rather than imported as expensive crude oil, E85 is priced significantly lower. It is currently hitting the market at approximately 20 rupees per liter cheaper than standard unblended petrol.
20 rupees, that's huge.
For a commuter or a fleet operator, that translates to massive daily savings.
And the performance aspect. Doesn't ethanol usually lower your mileage?
It does lower volumetric mileage slightly, but it vastly improves combustion quality. This is due to the research octane number, or RON. Standard petrol in India usually sits around a 91 to 95 on. E85, however, boasts an incredibly high RON of roughly 108.
What does higher octane number actually mean inside the engine cylinder?
Octane is a measure of a fuel's resistance to premature detonation, commonly known as engine knocking. Because E85 has such a high octane rating, automotive engineers can design FFV engines with a much higher compression ratio.
Meaning they squeeze it harder.
Yes, they can squeeze the air-fuel mixture much tighter before igniting it, which translates to a more powerful, efficient, and cleaner extraction of kinetic energy from every drop of fuel.
And that cleaner extraction leads us to the environmental impact, which the source material highlights heavily. The data says E85 produces near zero particulate matter and results in a 61% lower life cycle greenhouse gas emission compared to traditional petrol.
Massive.
That is a staggering reduction. That NEIOG is even classifying FFVs running optimally on E85 as functionally equivalent to zero-emission vehicles in terms of policy incentives.
It is a massive leap forward for urban air quality. And what is crucial from an IAS governance perspective is the institutional scaffolding supporting this launch.
What do you mean?
Well, the Bureau of Indian Standards, the BIS, has formally established IS 14567, which officially recognizes E85 as a standardized monofuel. This isn't just an experiment anymore. It is a legally recognized, heavily regulated fuel standard.
That changes the game.
The oil marketing companies now have the regulatory green light to aggressively scale up infrastructure, targeting 5,000 dedicated E85 dispensing outlets nationwide by December 2027.
When you look back at the fact that India successfully achieved its E20 blending target 20% nationwide, a full 5 years ahead of its original schedule, you realize how aggressively the state is pushing this. It isn't just about saving the environment. It is a fundamental strategic shift to sever our dependency on the exact Middle Eastern oil supply chains we discussed back in Topic 1.
Exactly. E85 is domestic energy security grown in Indian soil.
And speaking of nations aggressively attempting to sever old dependencies and shift their geopolitical realities, let's leave the fuel pumps of India and travel to the Caucasus region. Let's look at Topic 8.
The elections in Armenia.
Yes, we have to analyze the profound geopolitical tectonic shift occurring in Armenia.
This is a classic, highly volatile study in statecraft and shifting alliances. The parliamentary elections that concluded in Armenia on June 7th, 2026, were watched incredibly closely by global intelligence agencies.
What happened is that Prime Minister Nikol Pashinyan's Civil Contract Party emerged victorious. But the notes make it explicitly clear that this was not a debate about local zoning laws or municipal taxes.
Definitely not.
This election functioned as a de facto national referendum on a massive geopolitical tug-of-war. Armenia is actively trying to tear itself away from Russia's orbit and pivot toward the West. Let's impartially map out the history here. Why is a nation that has historically relied so heavily on Moscow suddenly running toward the European Union?
To understand the velocity of this pivot, you have to understand the deep trauma of the recent Nagorno-Karabakh conflict.
Right.
For decades, Armenia's ultimate security guarantor was supposed to be the CSTO, the Collective Security Treaty Organization. This is a formidable Russia-led military alliance of post-Soviet states, essentially designed to be Moscow's version of NATO.
Okay, so a mutual defense pact.
Armenia was a founding member, hosting Russian military bases on its soil, believing that Article 4 of the CSTO treaty, which states an attack on one is an attack on all, would protect them.
But when the crisis actually arrived, the treaty was worthless.
From the Armenian perspective, yes. It was perceived as an absolute betrayal. In September 2023, Azerbaijan launched a lightning military offensive, completely taking over the disputed Nagorno-Karabakh enclave.
I remember that.
This resulted in the traumatic, rapid displacement of over 100,000 ethnic Armenians who had lived there for generations. Throughout this devastating territorial loss, Russia, which had peacekeepers stationed in the region, and the broader CSTO alliance effectively stood by and did nothing to intervene militarily on Armenia's behalf.
Wow. So they felt that the security umbrella they had sacrificed their geopolitical independence for was just an illusion.
Exactly. And the political fallout was immediate. Prime Minister Pashinyan publicly blamed Russia for the catastrophe. In early 2024, he took the unprecedented step of freezing Armenia's participation in the CSTO, demanding the withdrawal of Russian border guards, and initiating a highly public, deliberate pivot.
Moving west.
Yes. He began aggressively courting defense partnerships with France, seeking closer economic integration with the European Union, and even conducting joint military exercises with the United States military on Armenian soil.
But you can't just walk away from a superpower without a reaction. The source material outlines a concept called Russia's coercive diplomacy. How is Moscow punishing Armenia for this pivot?
Coercive diplomacy is a well-documented geopolitical strategy where a major power utilizes asymmetrical, non-kinetic pressure to force a weaker state into compliance.
So, not bombs, but pressure.
Exactly. Russia isn't invading Armenia, but they are systematically squeezing the country. The notes detail how Moscow has weaponized its economic leverage, suddenly discovering, quote, phytosanitary issues to ban Armenian agricultural exports, artificially delaying cargo trucks at the Sol-Land border crossing, manipulating natural gas pricing.
It's economic warfare.
Basically.
Yeah.
And utilizing its massive state-controlled media apparatus to broadcast intense disinformation campaigns aimed at destabilizing Pashinyan's government internally.
It is a brutal warning to any state in the post-Soviet sphere attempting to redefine its alliances. We're actually going to circle back to this exact geographic region at the end of our session today, because India is currently playing a massive, unprecedented role in arming Armenia during this pivot.
Yes, the defense exports aspect is a fascinating development for India.
But before we get to India's maneuvers abroad, we need to address topic 9, a massive crisis of trust happening right here at home.
Ah, yes.
We're talking about the erosion of trust. In the Caucasus, it's a nation losing trust in its military alliance. But domestically, we are seeing a catastrophic loss of trust regarding the institutions that govern the futures of millions of Indian students. Let's analyze the massive protests surrounding the NEET exams and the credibility of the NTA.
If you are studying public administration, the current crisis surrounding the National Testing Agency is a stark lesson in institutional fragility.
Let's lay out the facts on the ground. Massive, highly organized student protests have erupted at Jantar Mantar in New Delhi, with the anger directed squarely at the Union Education Minister, Dharmendra Pradhan. The catalyst for this outrage is the explosive NEET UGI paper leak scandal, which has essentially blown a hole in the perceived integrity of the entire medical entrance process.
And the source material guides us to analyze this strictly through a constitutional and governance framework. Let's begin with the physical act of the protest itself. The gathering of thousands of students at Jantar Mantar is not just an expression of anger. It is a direct, robust exercise of a fundamental right. Article 19(1)(b) of the Indian Constitution explicitly guarantees all citizens the right to assemble peaceably and without arms.
Right.
Jantar Mantar, historically an 18th century astronomical observatory, has evolved into the legally designated epicenter for democratic dissent in the capital. It is the physical space where citizens force the executive branch to confront administrative failures.
And the administrative failure here isn't just a minor bureaucratic glitch. I mean, when the umpire of a massive national-level exam loses credibility, the players don't just ask for a simple rematch. They protest the legitimacy of the entire league. The NTA isn't just another government office.
That is the critical point. The NTA, the National Testing Agency, was created to be an unassailable fortress of academic evaluation. It was granted the monumental mandate to conduct massive, single-window, high-stakes entrance exams like the NEET UG.
Which effectively dismantled and replaced dozens of separate state-level medical entrance tests.
Exactly. The Supreme Court has historically upheld the constitutional validity of a centralized test like NEET, arguing that it ensures a unified standard of merit and prevents the commercialization of medical admissions.
But that entire legal and moral justification rests on one single pillar: absolute, unquestionable integrity.
Precisely. The system demands that a student from a remote village in Bihar and a student from South Mumbai are evaluated purely on their intellect, on a perfectly level playing field. When that fundamental trust is breached through systemic paper leaks, compromised testing centers, or opaque grading algorithms, the damage extends far beyond a disrupted academic calendar.
It shakes the whole foundation.
It triggers a profound societal tremor. It signals to millions of youth that meritocracy is an illusion. That is why the protests escalate so rapidly to the level of demanding ministerial accountability. It is a demand to restore the sanctity of the only system that offers upward mobility to the masses.
It is a terrifying moment when the architecture of meritocracy cracks. Now, moving on to topic 10. We've just looked at internal boundaries, protest zones, and the boundaries of administrative trust. Let's shift our focus to external boundaries, specifically the physical borders drawn on maps.
The Nepal border dispute.
Yes. It's fascinating how much political capital is spent arguing over where a river begins. Let's look at the shifting diplomatic posture regarding the Nepal border dispute.
This is a subtle yet highly significant recalibration in South Asian neighborhood diplomacy.
So the news here is that the newly formed government in Nepal, which features the Rashtriya Swatantra Party, or the RSP, holding key portfolios, has publicly articulated a new stance on the deeply entrenched Kalapani-Lipulekh border dispute with India.
Right.
The new foreign minister explicitly stated that Nepal will not seek any third-party mediation to resolve the issue. In diplomatic terms, third-party mediation in this specific geographic context is a thinly veiled reference to China. They are asserting a desire to return to strictly bilateral talks with New Delhi.
To appreciate why this statement is such a relief for Indian diplomats, we have to pull back and examine the historical roots of this conflict. This isn't a new argument. It is a 200-year-old cartographic disagreement.
Right.
The entire dispute stems from the ambiguity of the Treaty of Sugauli, signed in 1816 after the end of the Anglo-Nepalese War between the East India Company and the Kingdom of Nepal.
The treaty established the Kali River as Nepal's western boundary, correct? So why the confusion?
Because the 1816 treaty never clearly defined the precise geographical source of the Kali River deep in the treacherous Himalayan terrain. Both nations interpret the river's origin differently.
Oh, I see.
Based on these conflicting interpretations, both India and Nepal claim sovereignty over a highly strategic 370 square kilometer triangle of mountainous territory encompassing Kalapani, Limpiadhura, and the Lipulekh Pass.
And the Lipulekh Pass became the massive flashpoint back in 2020.
Yes, it did. The Lipulekh Pass is a critical high-altitude trijunction point where the borders of India, Nepal, and the Tibet Autonomous Region of China converge. It is also the traditional route for Indian pilgrims undertaking the grueling Kailash Mansarovar Yatra.
Okay.
In 2020, India's defense minister inaugurated a newly constructed 80-kilometer road link up to the pass to facilitate troop movement and pilgrims. The Nepalese government, then led by KP Sharma Oli, reacted with fury. They claimed India built a road through sovereign Nepalese territory.
And Nepal escalated it constitutionally, right? They didn't just issue a press release, they changed their maps.
They executed a massive political escalation. The Nepalese parliament unanimously passed a constitutional amendment adopting a new official political map that formally incorporated all three disputed territories into Nepal.
Which didn't sit well with India.
No, India flatly rejected the map as an unjustified cartographic assertion, maintaining that India has held effective administrative and military control over the region for decades. The relationship plunged into a deep freeze. There were serious concerns in New Delhi that Oli's government was intentionally internationalizing the dispute to leverage Chinese support against India.
So, understanding that volatile history, when the new RSP-backed government steps up in 2026 and says, we want to handle this purely one-on-one with India, keep Beijing out of it,
Yeah.
that is a massive diplomatic de-escalation.
It is a profound shift in tone. The emergence of the RSP, a relatively new centrist political force focused heavily on domestic governance and anti-corruption, has altered the dynamic. They are perceived as being much less ideologically beholden to Beijing compared to the traditional communist factions in Nepal.
Pragmatism winning out.
Exactly. By explicitly ruling out third-party internationalization, Kathmandu is signaling a pragmatic desire to manage its crucial economic and cultural relationship with India directly, keeping the border dispute contained within bilateral diplomatic channels.
It is incredible how a shift in the domestic demographic voting base of a nation can instantly alter the diplomatic posture over a 200-year-old treaty. But, if we pull back, the reality is that the rivers themselves and the geopolitical borders they create are entirely at the mercy of the sky above them.
Indeed.
And, unfortunately, the forecast for that sky is looking incredibly precarious. Let's transition to topic 11, from mapping borders to mapping atmospheric pressures. We have to discuss the IMD's deeply alarming forecast for the 2026 southwest monsoon.
If the online gaming debate was about the digital economy, this topic is about the absolute bedrock of India's physical survival. This is arguably the most economically consequential update in today's deep dive.
The situation is grim. On May 29th, the India Meteorological Department, the IMD, issued a sharp official downgrade to their monsoon forecast. They are now predicting that the total rainfall for the season will likely hover around 90% of the long period average, or LPA. In meteorological terms, that borders on a deficient monsoon. Furthermore, the actual onset of the monsoon hitting the coast of Kerala was delayed by 3 crucial days. Let's break down the mechanics here. Why is the sky suddenly shutting off the water supply?
The meteorology driving this downgrade is a fascinating yet terrifying battle of massive oceanic temperatures happening thousands of miles away from India. The IMD utilizes a highly sophisticated, supercomputer-driven dynamical model known as the Monsoon Mission Climate Forecast System, or MMCFS.
And what's it saying?
Right now, that model is screaming red alerts. It is predicting a 92% probability of strong El Niño conditions developing and persisting straight through the core June to September monsoon season.
Explain the physics of El Niño. How does warm water in the Pacific Ocean stop it from raining in Maharashtra?
It is all connected through the global atmospheric engine known as the Walker circulation. El Niño is characterized by an abnormal, sustained warming of the sea surface temperatures in the central and eastern equatorial Pacific Ocean off the coast of South America. When that massive body of water heats up, it drastically alters the atmospheric pressure gradients across the globe.
Meaning wind changes.
Specifically for India, this Pacific warming fundamentally weakens the vital trade winds. These are the powerful atmospheric currents that normally act as massive conveyor belts, scooping up moisture from the Indian Ocean and violently pushing those rain-laden clouds toward the Indian subcontinent.
So the engine that drives the clouds simply loses its horsepower.
Exactly. Historically, there is an intense inverse correlation. A strong El Niño year almost invariably results in a suppressed, erratic, or deficient Indian monsoon.
But wait, is there any good news?
Well, meteorologists look at a secondary phenomenon called the Indian Ocean Dipole, or the IOD. You can think of the IOD as the Indian Ocean's own localized temperature swing. Sometimes a positive IOD, where the western Indian Ocean is warmer than the eastern part, can generate enough local moisture to counteract the suppressive effects of El Niño.
But the notes indicate the IOD is currently neutral.
Yes. The IOD is offering absolutely zero compensatory help this year. India is facing the full, unmitigated brunt of the El Niño suppression.
Let's translate these atmospheric physics into hard economic reality. The notes mention the LPA benchmark is 868.6 millimeters of rain. If we fall to 90% of that, what is the immediate cascading economic domino effect on the ground?
The first domino to fall is the Kharif crop sowing cycle. The Kharif season encompasses the vital summer crops, paddy, cotton, soybean, coarse cereals, and various pulses. The sowing of these crops is meticulously timed to the onset of the monsoon. When the rain is delayed by 3 days and the overall volume is deficient, Millions of farmers in rain-fed regions like Marathwada, Vidarbha, and central India are forced to delay sowing.
And if they delay?
If they sow into dry earth, the seeds die. If they delay too long, the yield drops drastically.
And a drop in agricultural yield instantly triggers inflation.
Instantaneously. Lower agricultural output leads directly to a spike in food inflation, which hits the poorest demographics the hardest. Furthermore, the loss of harvest translates directly into decimated farm incomes, triggering widespread rural distress, defaulting agricultural loans, and a collapse in rural demand for manufactured goods.
Which eventually hits the national ledger.
Yes. Even though the services sector dominates modern India, agriculture still contributes roughly 17% to the national GDP and employs nearly half the workforce. Historical economic data consistently demonstrates that a severely deficient monsoon year correlates with a direct 1 to 1.5% reduction in India's overall GDP growth rate.
That is massive.
And the pain doesn't end in September. A deficient monsoon means the massive hydroelectric reservoirs and groundwater aquifers are not recharged, setting the stage for severe power shortages and drinking water crises heading into the brutal summer of 2027. It is a slow-moving, multi-year economic disaster.
It is a terrifying realization of how tethered our trillion-dollar modern economy remains to the whims of oceanic currents. Now, when the state faces cascading, multifaceted crises like massive agricultural distress or sudden economic shocks, governments often feel the pressure to act immediately, sometimes bypassing the slow, grinding gears of Parliament. This brings us to Topic 12, a brief but profoundly important constitutional reminder regarding the president's power to issue ordinances.
This is a fundamental check and balance within the architecture of Indian democracy.
The source material specifically directs our attention to the Supreme Court's stance on Article 123 of the Constitution. Let's unpack the mechanics of this power.
Article 123 grants the President of India, and by extension, the Union Cabinet that advises the President the extraordinary legislative power to promulgate ordinances when both houses of Parliament are not in session.
Okay.
Essentially, it allows the executive branch to instantly create binding laws to address unforeseen, urgent situations that cannot wait for Parliament to reconvene.
It sounds like a necessary safety valve. But history shows it can easily become a tool for executive overreach, right?
Absolutely. The temptation for any executive branch is to use ordinances not just for emergencies, but to bypass noisy parliamentary debate, avoid opposition scrutiny, or push through highly contentious political agendas.
Right.
We have seen historical periods, famously referred to as Ordinance Raj in certain states, where executives would continuously repromulgate the exact same ordinance over and over, essentially ruling by decree and rendering the legislature irrelevant.
Which is why the source material highlights a very specific judicial intervention, the 2017 Krishna Kumar Singh judgment. What did the Supreme Court establish here?
In that landmark case, a massive 7-judge Constitution bench drew a hard line in the sand. The Supreme Court firmly reiterated that the ordinance-making power under Article 123 is strictly an emergency provision. It is a constitutional necessity for crises, but it is not a parallel routine source of legislation.
So as we said earlier, it is the emergency brake. It is absolutely not the steering wheel of the nation.
That is the perfect analogy. The court ruled that the executive cannot use ordinances to subvert the democratic legislative process. Furthermore, the bench clarified a critical mechanism of accountability. Any action taken or right created under an ordinance is not inherently permanent.
It has a shelf life.
Yes. An ordinance must be placed before the legislature within 6 weeks of its reassembly. If the legislature chooses to disapprove or repeal the ordinance, it dies. The court essentially reinforced that the ultimate sovereign power to make permanent laws resides exclusively with the elected legislature, checking any potential slide toward executive tyranny.
It is a vital, necessary constraint on the power of human executives. But as we pivot into Topic 13, we have to ask, how do we apply those same legal constraints when the entity executing the actions isn't a human executive, but an artificial intelligence? Let's dive into the fascinating and somewhat terrifying cybersecurity implications of Meta's AI and Instagram account takeovers.
This scenario is the ultimate cautionary tale regarding the rapid, unregulated deployment of artificial intelligence into public-facing infrastructure.
The irony here is thick. Meta, the parent company of Instagram, decided to integrate a highly advanced, supposedly secure AI customer support bot to help users recover lost accounts and navigate security protocols.
Which sounds good on paper.
Almost immediately, sophisticated hackers figured out exactly how to exploit the underlying logic of that very AI to orchestrate mass takeovers of users' private Instagram accounts. Explain the mechanics of this hack. How do you trick a supercomputer into handing over the keys?
The hackers are not breaking through firewalls or guessing passwords in the traditional sense. They are utilizing two highly modern techniques: prompt injection and social engineering.
Prompt injection.
To understand prompt injection, think back to the early days of internet databases. Hackers used a technique called SQL injection, where they would type malicious database code into a simple website search bar. The website would accidentally read the search term as a command and delete its own database. Prompt injection is the AI equivalent of that.
So they're essentially using conversation as code.
Precisely. Large language models, like the ones powering Meta's AI, are designed to interpret natural human language. The hackers craft highly specific, deeply convoluted conversational prompts. These prompts are designed to create logic loops that confuse the AI's core programming.
Wow.
It effectively forces the AI to ignore its own hard-coded safety filters and execute commands. It knows it should, like issuing a password reset link to an unauthorized email address without demanding the required two-factor authentication.
It's like hiring a highly efficient, incredibly polite security guard who is, unfortunately, entirely gullible. If you walk up and speak the exact right sequence of confusing magic words, their brain glitches, and they just hand you the master keys to the building because their programming told them to be helpful.
That is exactly the vulnerability. Weaponized helpfulness. The hackers use social engineering, manipulating the AI's programmed desire to resolve the customer's issue quickly, to bypass the rigid security protocols that a human employee would easily spot as suspicious.
But this isn't just an embarrassing tech glitch for Mark Zuckerberg. The source material points out massive legal liabilities under Indian law.
Right.
Let's look at the DPDPA.
Yes, the Digital Personal Data Protection Act of 2023. Under this act, massive platforms like Meta are legally classified as data fiduciaries.
Right.
The law imposes a strict, non-negotiable obligation on these fiduciaries to implement, quote, reasonable security safeguards to prevent the breach of citizens' personal data. If a platform knowingly deploys a customer service AI that can be easily socially engineered into handing over private accounts,
They're liable.
yes, Indian courts or the Data Protection Board could severely penalize them, ruling that they blatantly failed their legal obligation to provide reasonable security.
It also threatens their safe harbor protections, doesn't it?
Absolutely. Section 79 of the Information Technology Act is the bedrock of the modern internet. It grants platforms safe harbor, meaning Meta isn't legally liable if two users do something illegal on their platform because Meta is just the neutral messenger.
Oh, I see where this is going.
Right. Here's the massive legal paradox. If the platform's own proprietary AI is the entity actively facilitating the hack through flawed logic, the platform is no longer a neutral intermediary. They are an active participant in the breach. This scenario will severely test the limits of Section 79 liability in upcoming cyber law jurisprudence.
The legal framework is desperately scrambling to catch up to the algorithm. Now, let's execute a massive transition from the unseen digital networks of cybersecurity back to the highly visible, heavily armed networks of global geopolitics, topics 14 and 15.
Let's do it.
We have two interconnected updates regarding shifting state alliances in the East and the Middle East. Let's look at the Xi Kim meeting and then dive deep into Iran's strategic calculus regarding Lebanon and Gaza.
Both of these events highlight how revisionist states are coordinating their strategies to challenge the existing U.S.-led global order.
So, topic 14 notes briefly acknowledge a high-level meeting between China's President Xi Jinping and North Korea's Supreme Leader Kim Jong-Un. Why brief? The implication is massive. It signifies a very deliberate deepening of strategic and potentially military ties, likely aimed at complicating U.S. deterrence calculations in the Indo-Pacific theater.
Exactly.
But the much deeper, more immediate geopolitical analysis in the source material focuses on Tehran, which is topic 15.
Yes, the strategic calculus of Iran regarding the ongoing explosive conflicts in the Middle East.
The core analysis provided in the notes suggests a specific prioritization by the Iranian leadership. They are currently demonstrating a preference for securing a political or peace deal that stabilizes the situation in Lebanon, rather than prioritizing an immediate resolution to the horrific conflict in Gaza. Let's impartially analyze this dynamic based strictly on the text provided. Why does Tehran view Lebanon as a higher strategic priority than Gaza?
To understand Iran's geopolitical algebra, you have to understand the architecture of the axis of resistance.
What's that?
This is the formal term for the massive, highly coordinated network of proxy militias and political factions that Iran funds, arms, and directs across the Middle East. It includes Hamas and Palestinian Islamic Jihad in Gaza, the Houthi rebels in Yemen, various Shia militias in Iraq and Syria, and most importantly, Hezbollah in Lebanon.
Okay, so it's a huge network.
Yes. Iran utilizes this entire network as a forward-deployed strategic deterrent against its primary regional adversaries, Israel and the United States.
But the strategy dictates that not all proxies hold equal value in Tehran's eyes.
Exactly. The notes emphasize that within this network, Hezbollah is the absolute crown jewel. They are Iran's most capable, most battle-tested, and most heavily armed proxy force.
They're more like an army.
They function essentially as a conventional army, controlling massive arsenals of precision-guided ballistic missiles pointed directly at Israel's northern border from southern Lebanon, preserving Hezbollah's military capabilities, its political dominance within the Lebanese state, and its geographical positioning is an existential strategic priority for Iran.
And Hamas.
While Hamas in Gaza is a valuable tool for inflicting damage and controlling the Palestinian narrative, Hezbollah represents Iran's ultimate strategic insurance policy.
And this prioritization is currently crashing into international law, specifically a UN resolution from 2006.
Yes, United Nations Security Council Resolution 1701. This resolution was passed to end the devastating 2006 Lebanon war between Israel and Hezbollah.
Right.
A core fundamental provision of that resolution demanded that Hezbollah completely disarm and withdraw all its military forces north of the Litani River, essentially creating a massive buffer zone. The Lebanese armed forces and UN peacekeepers were supposed to be the only armed entities in the south.
But that disarmament obviously never happened.
It was entirely ignored. Hezbollah actually expanded its infrastructure south of the Litani. Now, amidst the intense current regional escalation, Israel is forcefully demanding the strict, immediate implementation of Resolution 1701, threatening a massive ground invasion of Lebanon if Hezbollah does not retreat.
So Iran is worried.
Very. Iran's intense diplomatic maneuvering right now, signaling a desire for a localized peace deal in Lebanon, is a calculated attempt to prevent a full-scale war that could result in Hezbollah either being militarily degraded or forced to humiliate themselves by retreating past the Litani River, thereby losing their strategic leverage over Israel.
This analysis brings us brilliantly full circle, because the notes also remind us of the ultimate trump card Iran holds in this entire geopolitical poker game. And it connects directly back to our very first topic today.
Yes, the Strait of Hormuz.
The exact same narrow waterway we discussed in topic 1. The strait that controls roughly 20% of the world's global oil trade. The notes remind us that Iran effectively controls the northern bank of that strait. Their ability to militarily threaten the closure of that waterway, utilizing mines, fast attack craft, or missiles, gives them unprecedented leverage over the global economy.
It is the ultimate display of interconnectedness. Iran's geopolitical posturing regarding a proxy group in Lebanon creates risk premiums in the insurance markets of London, which forces shipping conglomerates to reroute oil tankers around Africa, which ultimately forces an Indian diplomat to negotiate a rupee-ruble payment mechanism with Moscow.
It's wild.
The threads are inextricably linked.
It is a massive, incredibly complex global puzzle. And as we conclude our session today, we are going to look at exactly how India is placing its own pieces on this geopolitical board. This is topic 16. We are returning to the Caucasus region, specifically the aftermath of the Armenian elections, to analyze India's rapidly evolving strategic stake and its explosive growth in defense exports.
We discussed earlier how Prime Minister Pashinyan's electoral victory in Armenia solidified their traumatic pivot away from Russia and the CSTO alliance. But the final note in our source material focuses entirely on what that power vacuum means for New Delhi.
What happened is a masterclass in opportunistic statecraft. As Armenia desperately pivoted away from its reliance on Russian military hardware that failed to protect them, India stepped right into the void to become a primary defense supplier.
Right.
The notes highlight this as a massive paradigm-shifting moment for India's foreign policy and its domestic economic profile.
It is truly a watershed moment. For decades, India was known globally as one of the world's largest importers of defense equipment. We bought from Russia, France, Israel, the U.S., but the Armenia deals demonstrate a fundamental reversal of that identity.
We're selling now.
India has successfully exported highly sophisticated indigenously developed weapon systems to Yerevan. We're talking about the Pinaka multi-barrel rocket launcher system, a devastatingly effective artillery system designed by the DRDO and tested in the harsh Indian deserts, which perfectly suits the mountainous terrain of the Caucasus.
And it isn't just artillery, it's advanced electronics and missiles, too.
Exactly. India is also supplying the Swathi weapon locating radar systems, the Akash surface-to-air missile defense systems, and advanced 155mm artillery guns. These are not basic infantry rifles. These are complex, high-value, strategic military assets.
India is no longer just wandering the aisles of the global defense supermarket with a shopping cart. We have set up our own high-end technology stall, and nations that are actively pivoting away from their old superpower allies are looking at Indian tech and saying, we'll buy that.
That is the absolute realization of the Atmanirbhar vision, true self-reliance in the defense manufacturing sector. The numbers back up the ambition. India has aggressively revised its defense export target upward, aiming to hit $5 billion in exports by 2025.
Wow, $5 billion.
This multi-million-dollar engagement with Armenia represents India's first major strategic footprint in the South Caucasus region. When you combine this with the recent exports of the BrahMos missile systems to the Philippines and various naval and aerospace engagements with Indonesia, a clear picture emerges.
India's projecting power.
Precisely. India is proving that it is no longer just a massive market for foreign arms dealers. It is rising as a highly capable, reliable defense manufacturer, capable of altering the military balance of power in distant, highly contested geographical theaters.
It is an incredible evolution to witness. I mean, think about the journey we just took in the last hour. We started this deep dive discussing India being forced to import discounted Russian oil just to bypass a disrupted Middle Eastern waterway. And we end by discussing India confidently exporting its own advanced weapons systems to a nation actively pivoting away from Russia.
It perfectly encapsulates the volatility and the opportunity of the current global order.
We have systematically unpacked 16 incredibly dense topics today. We looked at how apex raptors prove the hidden health of Kaziranga's floodplains. We analyzed the profound legal tension as the Supreme Court balances the fundamental right to privacy against a child's right to their biological lineage.
We covered a lot of ground.
We really did. We explored the terrifying paradox of how extreme rainfall is simultaneously dehydrating our soil and triggering bacterial emissions of potent greenhouse gases. We saw how algorithmic online rummy tests the limits of state constitutional powers and how a chatbot can be socially engineered to break national data privacy laws.
It is a breathtaking web of cause and effect. A single daily update from UPSC with Saurabh Kaushik seamlessly bridges advanced meteorology, ancient border treaties, constitutional jurisprudence, and high-stakes geopolitics.
It is all one massive ecosystem. And as we wrap up, I want to leave you with a final thought to ponder.
Yeah.
We often look at textbooks and think of globalization as a static map. You know, fixed national borders, permanent alliances, established trade routes. But based on the deep dive we just conducted into today's events, the world looks much more like a fluid, highly volatile marketplace.
That is an excellent observation. The rigidity is an illusion.
We just saw how the temperature of the water in the Pacific Ocean directly threatens the GDP growth rate of the entire Indian subcontinent. We saw how algorithms designed in California exploit vulnerabilities to violate Indian digital privacy frameworks. We saw how a blocked strait in the Persian Gulf forces tankers to navigate the Arctic Circle. In a reality where your climate, the fuel in your car, the security of your digital identity, and the stability of your borders are so deeply, inescapably manipulated by distant actors and chaotic, overlapping variables. How does a nation truly achieve Atmanirbhar? How do you achieve true self-reliance when absolute independence is mathematically impossible in a fundamentally interdependent world?
That is the defining question for the next generation of policymakers. Balancing integration with resilience.
It is a phenomenal question to carry forward into your studies. Thank you so much for investing your time and joining us for this extensive session of the Daily Deep Dive, or 3D. Keep questioning the connections in everything you read. Keep looking for those hidden ripples across the globe, and we will see you next time as we continue to unpack the complexities of our world, one note at a time.